Welcome to Voices and the Votes Dialogue Special on Liang Hui, or our annual 2 sessions. China is making moves to face the challenges of an aging society. As greater burdens fall on young people and employers, steps are being taken by the government to adjust to rapidly changing practical demands. In this year's 2 sessions, policies have been proposed on a range of pension, medical and social security issues, both personal and structural. To discuss those challenges and more, I'm happy to be joined in our studio by Professor Lu Jiehua from Beijing University, who is Vice President of the China Association of Gerontology and Geriatrics, and Xu Jingduo, Senior Fellow at the Pangu Institution. Via satellite, we shall talk with Mr. Yue Shimazu, who is in Hong Kong and former editor at Japan Times Weekly. We shall also speak to Mr. Fraser Cameron, Director of the EU Asia Center in Brussels. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. As we often say on the program, China is getting old before it gets rich. To ease the burden for companies, it's been decided that employers in urban areas will be able to reduce the contribution to the basic pension insurance of employees down from about 20% to 16% for companies. Professor Lu, how significant will this help be? And apparently this applies to employees with an urban hukou but not rural. Why is that?
Well, I think it will be a big help for the company with that's related to the labor-intensive industries, and that would be reduce the business operation cost for the companies, because usually early period it was about 20%. Then there would be a 4% decline from 20 to 16. So that would be encourage more business to with low cost.
Plus tax deduction, the tax rate would also be very helpful for companies. Does that mean that the SMEs in the private economy will have a big kind of a year of prosperity despite the adversity of downward spiral?
Yeah, I think the priority right now is really to revitalize this private sector, in which the SME plays an important role. Basically, 98% of the enterprises are, from the private sector. So this reduction of the fees for social security, the contribution, and also the tax costs will help, supposed to help revitalize the part of the economy. In order to solve whatever problem like in the social security issue, but you have to have a strong economy, have a booming economy. If you have a booming economy, it's easier to handle those other challenges. I think that's the logic. Let me cross over to Fraser Cameron. Hi, Fraser.
Hi.
Rumsfeld, the former Secretary of Defense of the Bush administration, ironically called many countries in Eastern Europe old part of Europe, meaning in the understatement, people are getting pretty old. The demographic changes in your labor force have indeed embarrassed the policymakers and politicians. I'd like to have your thoughts on what kind of inspirations or lessons can China draw from the old part of Europe?
Well, the old part of Europe for more than half a century now has a very comprehensive system of social security covering unemployment, covering family benefits, maternity leave, pensions. And this is what people expect. This is partly the reason why you had the Gilets jaunes protests in France recently, that Macron was saying we can't go on paying so much from the budget to support these social security contributions. Workers have to pay more. So it's a sensitive issue. When the economy has been doing well in Europe, nobody was complaining. But now, in a period of austerity, especially as pensions are often protected by law in many countries, it's becoming an intergenerational thing. Why should the older people, get such good benefits? So that's becoming a real political issue in Europe as well.
But don't you think, Fraser, that the free movement of labor forces from Central Eastern Europe in particular will help stimulate the growth in the old part of Europe? Now, politicians in the old part refuse to share dividends of taxation or whatever, and yet they need the labor force very badly. What do you think of the structural contradiction?
Well, you're right. I mean, the countries in old Europe, Western Europe, are very much in need of immigrant labor, and Eastern Europe so far has been supplying that. You think of the acronym Polish plumber. Well, Britain, France, Germany need plumbers and other workers from Eastern Europe. At the same time, there is a political feeling that somehow they are taking our jobs. That's a slogan that's used, and therefore many people politically support populist parties who want to stop immigration, even though that is going to hurt them economically, because all the evidence shows that immigrants into Western Europe pay more taxes into the system than they take out on insurance benefits. So it's a political conundrum. Western Europe needs these immigrant laborers, but politically it's a very sensitive environment in which to actually welcome them.
Thank you so much. I do appreciate Fraser. Well, the welfare policy in the old part of Europe has caused a lot of controversies and debates around the world. Hence, the the protection of human rights, and despite the anger of yellow vest protesters in the streets. Let me cross over to our immediate neighbor, a Japanese voice, to talk about the aging society in Japan, whether the future of the Japanese economy depends on emancipation of women from household chores or the use of robots. Let me cross over to Yoichi Mazu. Hello, Yoichi. What can China learn from Japan?
Unfortunately, not very many good lessons when it comes to dealing with the elderly. Japan is the agingest society in the world. We've got negative population growth, declining birth rates, and a real crisis, especially for the section of young workers who might work in the social welfare sector, for example, in senior citizens' homes as lower paid staffers in hospitals. Massive crisis in which we have too many elderly, too many patients, and not enough caregivers. And the price of every caregiver, of course, is going to be very high in a country like Japan. So this is a very terrible example to the rest of the world. Plus, the budget for welfare is only is the lowest among the developing countries of the OECD. It stands at 12% for social benefits. That's less than half the rate of Scandinavia and Germany, and even lower than the United States and Britain, which are kind of laissez-faire societies. So a very terrible situation we're in with, and I'm afraid that the current government has put their money into military expenditures, more ships, more airplanes, more rockets and things, and not into their own people who worked very, very hard to create the Japanese miracle. And unfortunately, the other problem is that temporary workers, the younger people, don't have steady jobs, and in Japan, a lot of your social benefits depends on your income, and not just income levels, but the length, the duration of your work, the number of years you work. And young people are getting booted out of their jobs in the temporary work. So when that generation gets aged, let's say 20 years, there will be no money left for them.
However, a Japanese economy in tatters following the Plaza Accord did recover quickly over the past decades, and Japan deserves credit for the spirit of resilience and sacrifice. Therefore, the distinct differences between Europe and Japan when it comes to social benefits. Coming back to the Beijing studio, let's look at the reduction of pension insurance for the employers and the impact on employees. Will employees benefit enormously from this preferential policy?
I think it will be this new policy will be a win-win situation, not only for the company but also for the individual to pay, because the company will pay less for the pension system, but also individual may get high or more salaries. That's the benefits.
Also, since last year, there was talk of this tax collection reform of the pension, of this social security contribution collection. Some of the companies actually, they failed to pay for the employees the pension and other benefits over there. But now with the reforms, basically, the tax authority will be in charge of collecting that money. Basically, there's no way for them to avoid paying that kind of fees. But so that's why at the same time you have the government that says, hey, we will reduce your burden. So to encourage the companies to fulfill their responsibility, and then there's no loopholes, so that will benefit the employees' long-term point of view. Yeah.
Let me go back to Fraser. Are you still on the line?
Yes.
Let's look at the retirement age in Europe. Don't you think inevitably, for an aging society, the retirement age will somehow be promoted and increased to, for example, at least 65, if not the 68. In the case of Germany or, France, Brussels, I mean, will that be a common practice for catch-up economies?
Yes, I mean, quite simply, the previous idea of working till 65 and then retiring is no longer valid. I mean, people are living longer, they're healthier. Many people want to continue working as well. So gradually the retirement age in Western Europe is going up to 67, 68. And I think that probably in the next 2 or 3 years it will come up towards the 70 mark as well. It may vary between professions. Obviously, if you've been doing a tough job as a coal miner, you have every right to retire at 65 or even earlier. But if you're an office worker, there's no reason why you can't go on to work until 70.
Fraser, an expert of Russian studies, what can you tell us about the recent protests by Russians who took to the street in protest against the government's attempt to promote retirement age from the current 60 to 65?
Well, that was a political mistake by Putin, who I think was increasingly out of touch with the economic problems that many Russians face. The reality is that, the top 10, 20% in Russia are doing very well, but there's a vast proletariat who are not doing well, and they are obviously looking forward to an early retirement. And therefore, if you start raising the age, they're not going to actually get many benefits, because Russians die out quite early in life because of the tough life there, alcoholism, etc. So they're extremely annoyed about this, and Putin should have seen this coming.
Well, perhaps a comprehensive ban on the drinking of vodka would help. Because
it was tried and failed.
Yeah, Gorbachev failed, and that put an early end to his political career somehow, despite the glasnost and perestroika, two fronts of his new ideology towards the closing days of the Cold War. Let me cross over to Yoichi Mazu. Hi, Yoichi. Yoichi, what do you make of the aging, the retirement age in Japan?
Well, elderly workers have been agitating to raise the age at least to 70 and actually above. There are people who are 75 who would like to get back to work and are very skilled workers compared to younger workers. So there definitely is a demand among the older working people who are fit and healthy. Of course, that's also, we've got a lot of people who are ill, who are invalid, and who are not capable of working. So it is a very split population there among the elderly. The other problem is many of the jobs that these elderly workers who are very, very skilled at jobs, let's say machining, machine tools, a lot of those jobs are going away as we get to more automation, more robotics, and also more use of plastic instead of metal. I mean, something as simple as that. And the runaway jobs, of course. Most of Japanese industry today is not in Japan. It's moved out to other countries with much younger societies, for example, Vietnam, Indonesia, and so on. So in a certain sense, as much as we could use those elderly workers to provide really experienced labor to the market, the jobs are quickly disappearing. The factories are leaving. So this is a huge crisis. And I think this is one that's going to affect China in the long run, runaway shops.
I'm a bit confused, Professor Lu. In an age of digital technology and artificial intelligence, pretty soon in the foreseeable future, as an expert of gerontology, what are the major issues in your textbook about the future of the Chinese economy regarding retirees, pensioners, and pension insurance?
I think aging will be a big issue for China because population aging will be go up in near futures, and will be a challenger for the pension system because we practice a pension system as the scheme of pay as you go. That means the working people pay the money, and then the retired people are getting the money, and then the retired old people increase and working people shrink. Be one issue. It also has impact on the medical care and also on the social, other economic.
Is it a realistic goal, Professor Lu, to promote the current retirement age from 60 to 65 for males and from 55 of women to perhaps 60 in China?
Well, I think the retirement age is also kind of reform because earlier, like Japan and French and other countries already extend their retirement age. But China, I don't think you can will be a move from 60 to 65. Maybe retirement age reform will be a step by step, and like 1 year later, and it will be you cannot change with 5 years. I don't think that's realistic.
Is it doable, Professor Lu, to stop medical insurance, to stop paying medical insurance the moment you retire?
Well, that's only one option.
One of the options on the table.
Well, I know a lot of people move this topic, and they say even for the retirement, you have to pay medical insurance. But that's is institutional arrangement. You have to be careful to this kind of reform.
China is not a country or a big fan of shock therapy. We are not. Qinduo, in addition to the retirement age delay, some deputies of the NPC, our top legislature, also proposed to increase the minimum payment period in Chinese 养老保险最低缴费年限, which is currently 15 years. People stop paying pensions insurance after 15 years in order to maximize their benefits. However, Qinduo, the pressure on social insurance continues to grow. What do you think of the increase of minimum payment period?
Yeah, I think this is a minimum requirement for 15 years. You have to pay 15 years in order to get to the pension after you retire. The things like the more year you pay, and then the more it's about extra 1% you will get after your retirement. So there's also encouraging measures to encourage people to continue to pay after 15 years. And if people are careful and to read the regulation, you would love to pay more. After 15 years, you would pay like 16, 20, 30 years even, and then you will get more. Like for each year, 1% extra money you will get from that fund.
But so that is only theoretical.
Theoretical, yes. But I think it's reasonable to encourage people to continue to pay. Otherwise, people will say, "Hey, I pay 15 years, and that's all." And then I will continue for 20 years. After retirement, I will get more money from this fund. This fund obviously is not enough.
Surprisingly, and I feel a little bit embarrassed that in the vocabulary of political science and the vocabulary of Chinese official policies, we seldom see the commitments or responsibilities of. We see a lot of the commitments of taxpayers, but seldom could we see return of such commitments as a taxpayer. Does it mean however much you pay for the insurance or whatever social responsibilities, you won't enjoy an equal amount of the return? I mean, that's unfair. What's happened? What has happened or what can we learn from the industrial nations and developed countries?
Well, I think that I personally think because the pension will be a kind of a welfare system, and a welfare system you cannot be put too high. It will be optimum. And then another thing I think people should get some equality, I would say, because pension also social policies, and some people pay more, some pay less. That's the thing.
I think this is people starting to experience the benefit from this social security. For example, if you have a child, if the child is in the system, basically every year you pay 150 yuan. It's very little actually, 150 yuan renminbi, and then if you see the doctor, and then from the
medical.
the medical insurance that you would see that's a great help for the family. And for people living in the country area, that's only a few years back. That's for the first time in history, basically, they are included. And then if you see the doctor, if you're hospitalized, and half of the payment, the cost will be taken care of by the government. I think that's a great boost for a lot of people. So more and more people are starting to enjoy the benefits, and then you see the crisis. When people do that calculation, you see, a few years into the future, we will have a problem because, of course, it varies from province to provinces. Like in Guangdong, it's easier.
Yeah.
You have 10 laborers basically to support one pensioner, but in probably Heilongjiang, you have like 2 laborers to support one pensioner. That's far from being enough. And that is also a challenge.
Let me go back to Joyce Shimazu. Hello, Joyce.
Yes.
Despite the
Yes.
Formulation and design of policies in China about Social Security, execution at the corporate level is a different matter. In the case of Japan, perhaps ROK, where you have the strong solidarity, not solidarity, but trade union to solve the labor disputes. In China, it's an open secret that the trade union is very weak. It cannot perform the same duty like their counterparts in neighboring countries like Japan and South Korea. So what do you make of the labor rights that need to be protected? In China, this is a subject of academic research at the moment.
Well, certainly labor unions are a strong force in collective bargaining and transferring some of the wealth of corporations, maybe who would put their profits elsewhere, maybe even in other industries, or to shut down those factories, to put that wealth into long-term social benefit. And I think underlying it is a philosophy that, do corporations just have the right to leave their factories behind and change and just go where it's more profitable? And we've seen this real problem during this long bursting of the economic bubble that's gone on for a quarter century, where a lot of the strong companies that paid well to their union members have switched the businesses they do, have shut down their subsidiaries, have moved offshore. So basically, this has been tremendously destabilizing on government, and government has to pick up the pieces. The government has to pay for the damage left behind by these irresponsible corporations. So corporate bankruptcies is a real problem we're facing, because I think a lot of executives, they don't mind declaring, they have no loyalty to their companies. They'll have a golden parachute, they'll bail out, and they'll leave wreckage behind. And that's a lot of social wreckage of thousands of people that they're abandoning. And the government has to pick up the pieces.
Okay, Fraser, when Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher was in office, she caused controversies for some of the major policy options, such as, I'm not talking about the Falkland Islands, but like her defiance against labor movement. And that has caused a lot of anger from the Labour Party. But she went ahead and continued with a radical program of privatization. Well, that means a lot of workers might have been laid off. So what do you think of the relationship between trade union and the government in the UK?
Well, it's been relatively stable since the Thatcher period. I mean, during the Thatcher years, there were mass demonstrations against what the trade unions perceived were anti-union laws and her essential attack on the coal mining industry, etc. In the last 20 years, labor relations have stabilized. There's relatively few strikes in the UK. The trade unions have declined in membership. And those that are flourishing are those in the modern industries, and essentially they're looking at good conditions for their workers, the traditional thing that trade unions are there for. And the old industries, heavy industries, they're very much declining and don't have the same political clout as before. So the trade unions are still an important element in the UK, but they're not a political force as they were perhaps, 25, 30 years ago. Their influence has definitely declined.
Fraser, do you prefer to be looked after by your children or to be sent to a nursing home when you start to be confined to the wheelchair?
Well, I think everyone should make their own provisions rather than leave any burden to their children. It's up to you to look after yourself.
I wish Chinese parents could hear your voice. Thank you so much, Fraser. Thank you so much. Welcome back to the Beijing studio. Professor Lu, when it comes to taking care of old people, as I mentioned with Fraser, money isn't the only concern. Nursing homes promises to be a prosperous industry in China. It's about the real estate development. It's also about better use of medical resources for the elderly, retirees. So what do you think of the future, care of the elderly in China?
I think nursing home will be, the institution will go up in near future. But also, not only a nursing home, but also like a Chinese elderly want to get the home-based care from communities rather than to go nursing home. Because based on our studies, not all people want to go to nursing home. They want to stay with their children or their wife or their relatives. That's true. Not all. I think like 90% elderly want to stay at home or nearby receiving some community care. That's realistic. But when people getting old, like 80, their ability for daily life will be getting worse, and they will think about go to the nursing home.
Qingdu, do you think this is more of an issue about traditional Chinese culture, or financially it could be a major concern for the elderly to be taken care of by the nursing homes in China?
It's an issue. It's a financial issue as well as really lack of caretakers, caregivers, I would say. For Chinese, there's a strong tradition to stay with your family members when you are aging, right? You want to have the care from your children, but we have a one-child one-child policy, so that is a problem. And then Professor mentioned about community-based. That's really workable, probably, to make a good use of those, even retirees who retire very early. They can take care of the neighbors, and at the same time they will be paid, and they know each other. They have the trust. Actually, we should probably to do more in that respect.
Don't you think this is a nightmare for a young couple to look after 4 parents and 2 kids once we were to relax further the birth control policy? Very quickly, Yue Shumazu, what do you think of the future of Japanese nursing homes? Can we learn anything from you guys?
Well, the problem was we have overcrowding, lack of care, and about 3 years ago, one of the temporary nursing home workers took a knife and killed 19 of the inmates there because he felt that their life is so degraded that they're existing, they're not living, and there's no purpose for them. The best thing to do is just kill them, and he advocated killing all people in nursing home. So this is like a very existential nightmare we face, where society and young people no longer cherish the elderly, but consider them a burden, a waste, and people who have no purpose in our society. So I think it's a very nihilistic attitude, and I know many people, young people in Japan, people who are now middle-aged, who have adopted that attitude.
Thank you so much, Joyce.
Help their parents.
Thanks a lot. Deeper sense of crisis might be looming larger for the Chinese society because of the possible disintegration of the traditional family structure as parents are sent to nursing homes. That's a very big issue. I'll see you next time. The same time, our Voices and Votes. Until then, goodbye.